The garden was perfect. Every leaf, every flower, every breath of wind carried the signature of divine craftsmanship. Adam walked through Eden with eyes that had never seen corruption, breathing air that had never known pollution. But what if I told you that this paradise held secrets? What if the first man witnessed something so extraordinary, so terrifying, that it would echo through generations and become the foundation of humanity's most mysterious legends? Deep within the ancient texts, hidden beneath layers of translation and tradition, lies a story that most have never heard. A story that connects the Garden of Eden to the giants of old. A story that suggests Adam's eyes beheld creatures that defied every natural law, beings so massive and so powerful that their very existence would reshape everything we think we know about the beginning of human history. You see, we've been told a simple version of the story. Adam and Eve, a serpent, an apple, and exile. But what if that's just the beginning? What if the real drama was far more complex, far more supernatural, and far more dangerous than we ever imagined? Because buried in the original Hebrew texts, scattered through ancient manuscripts, and whispered in rabbinical traditions, are clues that point to something absolutely staggering. The first man didn't just witness the birth of humanity. He witnessed the birth of something else entirely. Something that would hay for millennia, unt the earth, something that would require divine intervention to stop. Before we continue, if this revelation is already stirring something deep within your spirit, let me know in the comments. Your engagement helps this message reach more hearts that need to hear these hidden truths. And make sure you subscribe, because what I'm about to reveal will completely transform how you read the opening chapters of Genesis. Now, let me take you back to a time when the veil between heaven and earth was thin, when spiritual beings moved freely between dimensions, when the impossible was commonplace and the supernatural was natural. This is the world Adam knew. This is the world that existed before the fall changed everything. The Hebrew word for garden, gan, doesn't just mean a place of plants and trees. It carries the meaning of an enclosed, protected space, a sanctuary. But protected from what? What was outside the garden that required such divine boundaries? The answer lies not in what was absent from Eden, but in what was present just beyond its borders. Ancient Jewish texts speak of the Watchers, celestial beings appointed to observe and guard creation. But something went wrong, terribly wrong. The Book of Enoch, though not canonical, preserves traditions that stretch back to the very dawn of human memory. These texts describe how 200 of these Watchers descended to Mount Hermon, bound themselves with mutual oaths, and began to interfere directly with the created order. But here's where it gets interesting. The timeline isn't what most people think. These events didn't happen centuries after Adam. They happened while he was still alive, while he was still walking the earth with memories of Eden fresh in his mind. The first man witnessed the corruption of creation itself. Picture this scene. Adam, expelled from the garden but still possessing the longevity that would allow him to live for nearly 1,000 years, walking through a world that was rapidly changing. The harmony he had known was dissolving. The peace between man and nature was breaking down. And then he saw them, the Nephilim, the fallen ones, the offspring of the union between the sons of God and the daughters of men. But these weren't just large humans. The Hebrew word Nephilim comes from the root naphal, meaning to fall, but it also carries the meaning of causing others to fall, to be cast down, to be overthrown. These beings didn't just fall from heaven, they caused everything around them to fall into chaos. Genesis chapter 6 gives us only a glimpse. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves from all whom they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. But what did he looked upon these giants see when Adam? What did the first man think when he witnessed the perversion of everything God had created good? The ancient texts suggest that Adam didn't just observe from a distance. He lived through the era when these beings walked the earth, when they taught forbidden knowledge, when they corrupted the very DNA of creation itself. The Book of Jubilees, another ancient text preserved by Ethiopian Christians, provides details that paint a picture of horror. These giants consumed everything in their path. They devoured the fruits of all the trees and the flesh of all animals. When that wasn't enough, they began to consume human flesh and drink human blood. The earth itself cried out under the weight of their violence. But Adam had seen perfection. He remembered what the world was supposed to be. Can you imagine the anguish of watching paradise turn into a nightmare? Can you fathom the grief of seeing the very image of God corrupted and twisted into something monstrous? The Hebrew text of Genesis provides subtle clues that most readers miss. When it says that God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, the word for wickedness is ra, which doesn't just mean moral evil. It means broken, corrupted, ruined beyond repair. Creation itself had been infected with something alien, something that didn't belong. And Adam witnessed it all. The first man became the first witness to what happens when heaven's order is violated. When spiritual beings cross boundaries they were never meant to cross. When the supernatural crashes into the natural world, without permission or purpose. But here's what makes this even more incredible. Adam didn't just witness the corruption, he witnessed the response. Because when God decided to cleanse the earth with flood waters, when the judgment came that would wash away the giants and their hybrid offspring, Adam was still alive. The genealogies make this clear. Adam lived for 930 years. Noah was born in Adam's lifetime. This means the first man saw both the corruption and the cleansing. He witnessed the rise of the Nephilim and their destruction in the flood. He observed the full cycle of rebellion and judgment. And somewhere in those centuries, Adam must have understood something profound about the nature of good and evil, about the cosmic battle that was raging around him, about the price of disobedience and the necessity of divine intervention. The implications are staggering. Every legend of giants, every ancient myth of titans and demigods, every cultural memory of a time when massive beings walked the earth, all of these stories trace back to events that Adam personally witnessed. The first man became the source of humanity's collective memory of the time when the impossible was real. But why have these details been hidden? Why do most people know nothing about Adam's encounter with the giants? The answer lies in the way ancient texts were preserved and transmitted. The full story was never meant to be hidden, but it was meant to be understood by those who were ready for its implications. Understanding what Adam witnessed changes everything. It explains the sudden appearance of advanced civilizations. It clarifies the origin of forbidden knowledge. It reveals why God was so specific about bloodlines and genealogies. It shows us that the spiritual battle we read about in the New Testament has been raging since the very beginning of human history. And if Adam witnessed the giants, if the first man saw the corruption of creation itself, then his testimony becomes the foundation for understanding everything that followed. Every prophet who spoke of spiritual warfare, every apostle who warned of demonic principalities, every revelation about the cosmic battle between light and darkness, all of it connects back to what the first man saw with his own eyes. The garden was just the beginning. The real story of humanity starts with what happened after the exile, when Adam found himself in a world where angels had abandoned their posts and giants stalked the earth, where the supernatural had become natural and the impossible had become inevitable. But there's so much more to this story than what we've uncovered so far. The ancient texts tell us that Adam's encounter with these giants wasn't a distant observation. It was intimate, terrifying, and transformative. The patriarch Enoch, who walked with God and was taken up to heaven, left behind detailed accounts of conversations he had with Adam. These conversations reveal that the first man carried wounds that went deeper than physical exile from Eden. Adam described beings that towered above the trees, their shadows falling across entire valleys. He spoke of voices that shook the ground when they called out to one another. He witnessed their appetites that could never be satisfied, their strength that could tear mountains apart, their knowledge that unlocked secrets God had kept hidden. But most disturbing of all, he saw their eyes. Eyes that held intelligence far beyond human comprehension, yet burned with a hatred that seemed to emanate from the very depths of hell itself. The book of Jasher, referenced in the Old Testament itself, preserves Adam's own words about these encounters. He said the giants moved like living earthquakes, leaving destruction in their wake not from malice alone, but from their very existence. The ground cracked beneath their feet, rivers changed course to avoid their presence, animals fled in terror, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings when they approached. But here's what makes Adam's testimony so crucial. He alone possessed the reference point of perfection. Every other human born after the fall had only known a broken world. They adapted to corruption because it was all they'd ever experienced. But Adam remembered Eden. He remembered harmony. He remembered what creation looked like when it functioned according to divine design. This gave him a unique perspective on the abomination he was witnessing. When he saw the giants manipulating the forces of nature, teaching humans to forge weapons of war, revealing the secrets of cosmology and magic, Adam understood something that escaped everyone else. This wasn't evolution. This wasn't progress. This was dev-thissolution. Was creation being systematically dismantled by beings who understood its structure well enough to corrupt it? The ancient rabbinical traditions speak of Adam's journals, written on tablets of stone that survived the flood. These tablets supposedly contained not just his observations of the giants, but detailed warnings about what their presence meant for the future of humanity. He understood that their corruption wasn't limited to their own generation. It was being written into the very fabric of human existence. Think about what this means. Adam watched as the giants taught humans metallurgy, but not for constructive purposes. They showed them how to forge swords and spears and instruments of torture. He observed as they revealed astronomical knowledge, but used it to introduce astrology and divination. He witnessed them sharing medical knowledge, but twisting it into practices of human sacrifice and blood rituals. Every advancement came with a poison pill. Every gift contained a curse. And Adam, with his memories of divine intention, could see the deception that everyone else missed. The giants weren't elevating humanity. They were enslaving it. They weren't sharing wisdom. They were spreading spiritual contamination. The implications of this timeline are staggering when you consider the genealogies. Adam lived to see not just the rise of the giants, but the birth of the generations that would be completely corrupted by their influence. He witnessed the transformation of his own descendants from image-bearers of God into something unrecognizable. Imagine the horror of watching your great-great-grandchildren worship the very beings that had destroyed paradise. Picture the agony of seeing human civilization develop not according to divine principles, but according to the twisted wisdom of fallen angels. Adam didn't just lose Eden. He lost his entire species to an influence he was powerless to stop. But the most chilling detail preserved in these ancient accounts concerns what happened when Adam tried to warn people. The texts describe how his words fell on deaf ears. The corruption had become so complete that humans could no longer distinguish between divine truth and demonic deception. They saw the giants as gods. They viewed their forbidden knowledge as enlightenment. They considered their violent culture as strength. Adam found himself in the position of being the only sane voice in a world gone mad, the only one who remembered what normal looked like in a reality that had redefined normal as chaos, the only one who could see the prison that everyone else mistook for freedom. And here's where the story takes an even darker turn. The ancient texts suggest that the giants didn't just corrupt human civilization randomly. They were following a plan, a systematic strategy to ensure that when God's promised seed came, when the deliverer prophesied in Genesis chapter 3 arrived, the human race would be so contaminated that redemption would be impossible. This wasn't just rebellion. This was an attempt at genocide. Not physical genocide, but spiritual genocide. The complete elimination of the divine image from humanity. And Adam watched it unfold, step by step, understanding the ultimate goal even when no one else could see the bigger picture. The Book of Enoch records that Adam lived to see the earth become so violent that men's thoughts were evil continually. But it wasn't just human evil. It was hybrid evil. The offspring of the giants had inherited not just their superhuman strength, but their supernatural malice. They didn't just commit crimes. They committed abominations that defied the very structure of creation. Adam witnessed cannibalism become common. He saw human sacrifice elevated to religious ritual. He observed as the distinction between human and animal was deliberately blurred through practices too horrific to describe in detail. The world he had known, where every creature remained within its created kind, became a nightmare of genetic manipulation and spiritual perversion. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Adam's testimony concerns his relationship with God during this period. The texts describe how the first man continued to offer sacrifices, continued to call upon the name of the Lord, even as everything around him descended into chaos. He maintained his faith not because circumstances supported it, but because he remembered what God was like before the world went insane. This faith became his anchor in a reality that had lost all moorings. While everyone else was being swept away by the current of corruption, Adam held fast to the memory of divine character. He knew that the God who had walked with him in the cool of the evening was still the same God, even if the evening had become perpetual darkness. And this brings us to the most remarkable part of the story. Because Adam's witness to the giants wasn't just about observing destruction, it was about preserving hope. In the midst of watching creation unravel, something extraordinary happened. Adam began to understand the deeper purpose behind the promise God had spoken in Eden. When the Lord declared that the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, it had seemed like a distant prophecy. But now, watching the giants corrupt everything they touched, Adam realized this wasn't just about eventual victory. It was about the necessity of that victory. The first man understood something that would take theologians millennia to grasp. The corruption he was witnessing wasn't accidental. It was strategic. Every act of genetic manipulation, every introduction of forbidden knowledge, every perversion of natural law served a single purpose: to make the coming of the promised seed impossible. But here's what the giants didn't understand. Their very existence was proof that the promise was real. Why else would they work so desperately to prevent it? Why else would they invest such tremendous effort in corrupting human bloodlines? Their rebellion revealed their fear, and their fear revealed the certainty of their ultimate defeat. Adam carried this revelation like a flame in the darkness. While the world around him descended into madness, he held on to the knowledge that this chaos was temporary. Not because circumstances would naturally improve, but because divine intervention was guaranteed. The same God who had promised the seed would ensure that seed could come. This is why the genealogies matter so much in the early chapters of Genesis. They weren't just family records. They were proof that God was preserving a pure line through the chaos. While the giants were systematically corrupting human DNA, the Lord was carefully guarding specific families. While fallen angels were introducing hybrid offspring, the Almighty was ensuring that true humanity would survive. Adam witnessed this preservation firsthand. He saw how God protected Seth's lineage, while Cain's descendants integrated with the giants. He observed how certain families remained untouched by the corruption, while entire civilizations fell under demonic influence. He understood that what looked like random survival was actually divine selection. The ancient texts describe Adam's growing excitement as he recognized the pattern. Each generation brought the promised seed closer to manifestation. Each preserved family line was another victory against the forces trying to prevent redemption. Every child born uncorrupted was a defeat for the giants who thought they could thwart divine purpose. But Adam also witnessed something else that filled him with both wonder and terror. The giants, despite their supernatural power, despite their advanced knowledge, despite their systematic corruption of creation, were afraid. Not afraid of humans, who posed no threat to them, not afraid of natural forces, which they easily manipulated. They were afraid of something else entirely. The Book of Enoch records conversations between the giants where they expressed concern about dreams they were having. Dreams of judgment, dreams of flood waters rising, dreams of their own destruction. These beings who seemed invincible were tormented by visions of their coming defeat. They knew their time was limited, even if they didn't know exactly how or when the end would come. Adam realized that these dreams weren't random nightmares. They were divine warnings. God was allowing the giants to see their future, not out of mercy for them, but as testimony to watching humanity that justice was certain. The same beings who appeared all-powerful during Bling creatures, the day became Trem in the night, haunted by images of their own judgment. This knowledge transformed Adam's perspective on everything he was witnessing. The violence, the corruption, the systematic destruction of creation weren't signs of evil's victory. They were signs of evil's desperation. The giants weren't acting from a position of strength. They were acting from a position of panic, knowing that their window of opportunity was closing. The first man began to see the entire drama from God's perspective. What looked like chaos to human eyes was actually a controlled burn. The Lord was allowing the rebellion to reveal its true nature, to demonstrate its ultimate futility, to show the entire universe that rejecting divine authority leads inevitably to self-destruction. Adam watched as the giants' own success became their downfall. Their corruption became so complete that it turned inward. They began fighting among themselves. Their hybrid offspring proved uncontrollable, even to their own parents. The knowledge they had shared with humans was being used against them. The very chaos they had created was consuming them. The ancient texts describe how Adam began to prophesy during this period. Not formal prophecies like the later prophets would deliver, but spontaneous declarations of divine truth that came to him as he observed the unfolding drama. He spoke of waters that would cleanse the earth. He proclaimed the coming of a righteous man, who would find grace in God's eyes. He declared that the giant's reign of terror had an expiration date, written in heaven itself. These prophecies weren't just predictions, they were weapons. Every word Adam spoke in faith was a blow against the spiritual forces trying to convince humanity that corruption was permanent. Every declaration of coming redemption was a crack in the foundation of despair the giants had tried to build. The book of Jasher records that Adam's words began to reach people who still carried traces of the divine image. Hidden among the corrupted masses were individuals who heard his testimony and remembered something deep within their spirits. They couldn't fully understand what they were remembering, but they knew it was true. They knew there had been something better, something pure, something worth fighting for. These people became the remnant. Not a large group, not a powerful movement, just scattered individuals who refused to accept corruption as normal. They preserved Adam's testimony, passing it down through generations, keeping alive the memory of what the world was supposed to be. But the giants noticed. They recognized that Adam's influence was undermining their work. His very existence was a constant reminder that their version of reality wasn't the only version. His testimony kept hope alive when they needed despair to reign supreme. So they decided to silence him. The ancient accounts describe assassination attempts that failed in ways that defied natural explanation. Weapons that should have killed Adam mysteriously missed their mark. Poisons that should have destroyed him somehow lost their potency. Traps that should have captured him inexplicably malfunctioned. It became clear that the first man was under divine protection for reasons that went beyond his personal survival. Adam's continued existence served a purpose that even he didn't fully understand at the time. He was living proof that God's original design could not be completely erased. He was testimony that the image of God, though damaged by the fall, remained indestructible. He was evidence that no matter how thoroughly evil might corrupt creation, it could never eliminate the possibility of redemption. This realization filled Adam with a joy that transcended his circumstances. While the world around him grew darker, while the violence increased, while the corruption spread, he carried within himself an unshakable certainty. The giants would fall, the flood would come, the seed would arrive, justice would triumph, love would win. And in the deepest darkness before the dawn of judgment, Adam began to see something that would change everything. Signs that the cleansing was about to begin. Indicators that God's patience with the giants was reaching its end. Evidence that the flood he had prophesied was no longer a distant possibility, but an approaching reality. The ancient texts speak of how the very elements began to rebel against the corruption. Rivers started flowing backward. The sun appeared dimmed even at midday. Animals began migrating in patterns that made no natural sense, as if they were fleeing from something that hadn't yet manifested. The earth itself seemed to be preparing for what was coming. But most significantly, Adam began to hear about a man named Noah, a descendant of Seth who was described as righteous in his generation, a man who walked with God in a world where such walking had become almost impossible, a man who was about to receive instructions that would preserve life through the coming judgment. Adam realized that his long witness to the age of giants was approaching its climax. Everything he had seen, everything he had endured, everything he had preserved through his testimony was about to be vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. The corruption would be washed away, but life itself would continue through the ark that Noah was called to build. Now, as we reach the end of this incredible journey through forgotten history, one truth stands crystal clear. Adam's witness to the ancient giants wasn't just a footnote in human history. It was the foundation stone of everything that followed. The first man saw the corruption, endured the chaos, and carried the promise through the darkest age our world has ever known. Every legend you've ever heard about titans and demigods, every ancient story about beings of immense power and terrible appetite, every cultural memory of a time when the impossible walked among us, all of it traces back to Adam's testimony. The first man became humanity's memory keeper, preserving the truth about what happens when heaven's order is violated. But here's what makes this story so relevant for us today. The same spiritual battle Adam witnessed is still raging. The same forces that corrupted creation in his day are still working to corrupt it in ours. The same choice between divine truth and demonic deception that faced his generation faces ours as well. If this hidden tale has opened your eyes to truths you've never seen before, declare it in the comments. Let me know how this revelation has impacted your understanding of Scripture and human history. And if you're ready to dive deeper into the mysteries that have been hidden in plain sight, make sure you're subscribed, because there are so many more shocking truths waiting to be uncovered. The giants may have fallen, but their influence echoes through the ages. And just like Adam, we are called to be witnesses to the truth in a world that prefers comfortable lies. Until next time, keep seeking the hidden things of God.